Okay, thanks guys. Just a quick safety briefing before we start with the flights. As you know, the drones have propellers and motors on them, so if you cannot approach the drone when the propellers and the motors are on, that'd be great. And if you can keep a safe distance, I would say minimum.
This is Arthur Mendez, a research and development engineer with HeroTech 8, a drone technology company that's working with researchers at King's College London on a project to test whether drones could be used to deliver naloxone to the site of opioid overdoses.
So now that the drone's in the station, it'll do all the automated checks and we can start the launch procedure and take off.
Sounds good. Thanks, Arthur.
Take off.
And they're not the only ones exploring the use of drones for medicines delivery. Another project is exploring the potential to transport small payloads between hospitals for individualised care, and a group in Scotland has the more ambitious goal of creating a national drone delivery network. I'm Dawn Connelly, the Pharmaceutical Journal's Senior Features Editor, and in this episode of the PJ Pod, I meet the experts behind several of these projects as they test the feasibility of using drones to deliver NHS medicines. I'll be looking into their safety and asking whether drone delivery of medicines will be routine for patients anytime soon. The idea of a drone dropping off patients' medicines isn't as futuristic as it sounds. The UK is actually a bit behind the times.
We're excited to announce that customers in College Station, Texas, who've signed up for Prime Air are going to be able to get prescription medication delivered to their doorstep in under 60 minutes.
In Texas, Amazon Pharmacy is already delivering prescription medicines to its customers using drones. Within 60 minutes of placing an order, customers will hear that familiar high-pitched noise as a drone descends to the agreed drop point before releasing its package and returning to the pharmacy. And there are other healthcare providers taking to the skies in the US. Several have partnered with drone startup Zipline to deliver prescription and over-the-counter medicines across Utah, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Ohio. Drones are also delivering medicines in Africa, Australia, Switzerland, and the Dominican Republic. So what's the story in the UK, where the road infrastructure is good and the airspace is small and busy? Is there a need for medical drone deliveries? And would they be a viable option for the NHS? Arthur, who you heard give me a safety briefing at the beginning, is working with Paul Royall, Senior Lecturer in Pharmaceutics at King's College London. After Arthur's demo flight, I sat down with Paul to hear about the benefits of transporting medicines via drones compared with the more traditional road routes.
Yeah, the benefits are about time and location. So drones can circumvent geographical barriers and improve access. So that could be communities living on islands or communities in urban areas that are surrounded by lots of traffic jams. It also helps with logistics if you've got medicines that have very short expiries in hours and days. So that could be things like chemotherapy and other aseptically prepared medicines. The drone can circumvent that kind of long logistical journey.
But Paul stresses that he doesn't see drones replacing traditional logistics, instead enhancing them for specific needs. For example, getting naloxone to an overdose site more quickly than an ambulance could.
So we called the project In Time Naloxone because we acknowledge the fact there may be other transport solutions. If an overdose occurred very close by, a place that was holding naloxone, perhaps a hostel, a clinic, the naloxone is easier to transport by foot. In the majority of cases, we found that a drone could be suitable, but as I said, we're acknowledging different transport solutions.
Paul and his colleagues used real-world data of fatal opioid overdoses where a bystander was present to show that drones could have reached 78% of cases within 7 minutes, the benchmark time for the arrival of emergency services for Category 1 calls in England. This is a huge increase on the 14% of cases that could have been reached by ambulances in that time frame. Paul worked closely with drug and alcohol inclusion service users to decide on the best way of delivering naloxone, including the format of the instructions for administration and how the drone would be retrieved afterwards.
There were some reservations about potential theft and diversion, so we're going to start to address some of those. And again, working with our service users, painting the drone with some dye, so that may be used to look at where it goes if it's removed, have almost a sale and return. So if the drone is returned, a small voucher is given for food or other things. Or using first responders, because working with the ambulance service, we kind of realised they've got too much on to try and retrieve a drone. And so we are working with some of the first responders, St John's Ambulance, or some members of the gig economy, people delivering stuff. Can we engage them to collect the drone afterwards and then receive a small payment for delivering it? But also, we've kind of accepted that in an emergency situation, the patient's the most important thing. So therefore, we're kind of modelling, 50% of the drones or even higher may be lost in the process. But outweighing the benefit to the patient and actually the cost to the nation, a £500 drone, well, okay, it's a lot of money, but, in the greater picture, it's very sort of, in terms of an economic impact, very low compared to the other costs.
So how would this type of service work in practice? Paul tells me that if a bystander suspects someone is having an overdose and makes a 999 call, the call handler would go through their standard process and dispatch an ambulance, but would also get in touch with the drone dispatcher.
Depending on the location, there'll be a decision made whether we alert our first responders or gig riders, or we activate our drone. Now, the drone takes probably about 30 seconds to do that. Thunderbird style, the roof opens, safety checks are made, drone flies off. It's operated by a remote pilot, and they've got all of the collision avoidance equipment on board, and they're visually seeing what's going on. And we have trialled this work at night as well in the test bed. Communication is also kept up with the bystander. They will be told that a drone has been dispatched, and please wait for that. And they'll be instructed on what to do when the drone arrives. The drone will land. The bystander will go out to the drone, and quite a lot of the overdoses happen in dwellings. And so we've already catered for in our modelling the time it takes for the bystander to go and collect the naloxone. They'll go, take the naloxone off the drone, go back to the person's suffering the overdose. They'll open up the pebble, read the instructions, and then they will administer the naloxone. While that's happening, the ambulance is on its way.
Phase 1 of the project was funded by the UK Office for Life Sciences and the Scottish Government's Chief Scientist Office through its Small Business Research Initiative. Paul's team is currently applying for more funding to progress the project.
The development study is to start to de-risk it, but also see if we can roll it out into more challenging and different areas. Then also looking at using different drones, because the kind of drone in a box or the drone hub or mobile station that we're considering, we're kind of drone agnostic, so we need smaller drones that could go slightly more quickly, or are there needs for a slightly larger drone that may have a winch, so we don't have to land so much.
And Paul says it's possible that drone stations could be located within pharmacies in future.
In our feasibility study, we looked at Gosport and we looked at the sort of alcohol and drug inclusion centres. If we go into different areas, say it would be similar inclusion centres, pharmacies, it could be council buildings as well. Anywhere really that we could plug in the box. Pharmacies feature a lot because it's a trusted service. They're located in really good places, both in inner cities and semi-urban areas as well. And there's some very good experts and support services there as well. And quite a lot of people that may use some of the inclusion services are getting some of the medications from pharmacies as well, so they can get to know their community. And we found working with the community is really important. So if a drone service was to be commissioned in a particular area, pharmacists are going to play a huge role. Perhaps some pamphlets, perhaps a little demo day, that kind of thing.
The pharmacy department at Northumbria Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust, which covers a huge, mainly rural area in the northeast of England, has already been working with drones to trial transport of chemotherapy between two of its hospital sites. The first phase of the project, run by Apian, a healthcare drone logistics startup, took place between February and May 2023. Mark Knowles is head of production at the Trust and was closely involved in the trial. He tells me that his priority was to establish that it's safe to transport chemotherapy in this way and that the quality and stability of the product wouldn't be adversely affected. Although there are currently no guidelines for transporting medicines via drones, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency does require evidence that the quality of aseptic medicines isn't adversely affected by transport and distribution. For example, regulations stipulate that multi-layer packaging must be used and product temperatures must be maintained, typically using cool packs and approved containers.
I think mainly for us, our kind of priority, we need to make sure that's safe for the patient, so the patient at the end of it gets the product that's being stored in the correct conditions. We're 100% sure that that hasn't deviated, hasn't gone too hot, too cold, hasn't been dropped. All of those things, we need to make sure that the final product reaching the patient is the highest quality.
Mark explains that the pharmacy production unit carried out a series of tests in the hospital before the trial started with a 3-litre cool bag that would be used for the drone flights. This bag is much smaller than the 8-litre bags that are currently used to transport chemotherapy by road. Mark wanted to make sure that the smaller bag would be able to maintain the required temperature for the duration of the journey, which he calculated to be a maximum of 3 hours.
During early testing, we did some sort of in-house benchtop testing to simulate a fridge product being left in a warm environment, and then we did a reverse of that. So we did a room temperature product left in a cold environment, and early indications showed about 60 minutes it would maintain the temperature for, which was obviously a lot less than the worst case scenario of 3 hours.
Further testing during the trial confirmed Mark's concerns that the smaller bag would not be able to maintain chemotherapy at fridge temperature while it was transported by the drone.
Yeah, so within that was the kind of the pre-trial data as well. So within the actual trial itself, what we did was we had actual drone flights flying, but again with no medications inside. So we did kind of 10 validation flights with an empty bag to replicate fridge and room temperature products, and we also did 10 flights with a full package of fridge and room temperatures again, and it was quite varied, the results. Most of the fridge lines didn't last long enough to kind of for the worst case scenario. There were quite some deviations. What we did find was that the kind of beginning and end of the journey was when more deviations occurred.
The impact of vibration generated from the rotor blades of a drone is something else that Mark planned to look at during the trial. This is particularly important when it comes to transporting monoclonal antibodies, for example, which are protein-based therapeutics that can be structurally unstable when exposed to thermal, chemical or physical stressors.
We did think about things like vibration and also chain of custody. They were the three main things that were at the start that we wanted to kind of iron out, but we didn't get past the temperature of things, so we didn't really explore the others.
I asked Christopher Law, a doctor and one of the co-founders of Apian, about the challenges that are experienced around maintaining the cold chain during the test flights.
So we found that a lot of the temperature aspects was deviated actually predominantly due to the fact that it was from transporting from the pharmacy department to the drone takeoff site. Actually during the flight it was great, and unfortunately, as you can imagine, sort of walking outside in the freezing weather in February 2023 and also in the warm cars that you would transport it in, that combination then actually made the temperature deviate outside of 228 degrees and 1525 degrees outside of that. But actually during the drone flight it was very, very stable. I mean, it was almost perfect.
Christopher says that all of the learning from phase 1 of the trial will be taken into the next phase of the project, which is scheduled to start later in 2024.
I think one of the lessons learned is also to make sure that we need to have the aircraft taking off at the hospital sites as well, and so that was a learning that we certainly took away and actually is what we're now going to be building, certainly into the future projects that we have, is to go from site to site without having to land slightly further away. It's all about just demonstrating the evidence, providing the data, and then going forwards and learning from that, and then sharing it with the wider industry and the regulators and the healthcare stakeholders to say, this is what we learned, and here's the case to why it should be a permanent service rather than simply a trial.
Another project that's testing the feasibility of transporting chemotherapy by drones is the £7 million CAELUS project. CAELUS is hoping to develop and trial the UK's first national distribution network to use drones to transport essential medicines, as well as blood, organs and other medical supplies throughout Scotland. I spoke to Jamie Hogg, a recently retired GP and clinical lead for CAELUS for the north of Scotland, to find out more about the project.
This is the first national scale project to look at the feasibility of developing a network for unmanned aerial systems. And I say unmanned aerial systems because it's not really just about the drones. It's about the integration of the airspace between unmanned aircraft and manned aircraft, which is an enormous piece of work. So this consortium, which makes up CAELUS 2, includes the Civil Aviation Authority, National Air Traffic Control, and is led by an airport group, AGS, which is Aberdeen, Glasgow and Southampton airports. But that's just the part of it, really. There are drone operators. There are companies which organise and delineate airspace. There are companies which develop delivery management systems, which will be used by pharmacists in the future to order up items that they want to move from A to B. And then there are a myriad of engineering firms and others involved in building drone ports and basically all the infrastructure that's required to monitor unmanned aerial vehicles as they move along a network. The NHS has been asked to look at the feasibility of moving medicines from one locality to another, and has been through a process of filtering out use cases which have been brought to us by pharmacists and clinicians and others to see which areas we should concentrate on in this kind of feasibility stage of developing a network.
One of those use cases is chemotherapy. Most cancer patients living in the Highlands and Islands currently have to travel to receive chemotherapy, and this can be hugely onerous, particularly if the treatment continues for years. Anthony McDavitt, Director of Pharmacy for NHS Shetland, explains what a medical drone service would mean for the island communities.
So chemotherapy, it's really important for us in Shetland that people have access to treatment closer to home. The last thing we want to happen, particularly for those with a cancer diagnosis, is they have to go off island to receive their care where we could deliver it here. So instead of moving the person close to the medicine, how do you move the medicine close to the person? And how do you use the skills you've got on island to allow someone to receive the care that they could get as close to home as possible? I think in terms of medicines, the medicine part is that we can't keep everything on island. We rely heavily on our colleagues and partners down in NHS Grampian and further afield to supply us with key therapeutics. One of those key therapeutics is cancer therapies, and chemotherapy in particular is not possible for Shetland, Orkney, Western Isles, or any of these other island groups, or even some of the more remoter parts of Grampian and Highland health boards to run their own aseptics departments and produce their own chemotherapies. So having viable logistical routes within the north of Scotland and across the remote and rural areas, and even to the south of Scotland as well, will give us an opportunity to shore up some of that risk.
Anthony highlights other medicines use cases where a drone network could improve care for patients in Scotland.
Absolutely. There's the rarely used and urgent medicines that we do not keep a full stock of on island. These are very low instant and very low use cases that we would need to draw on that, but it would provide an additional layer of logistical sustainability or resilience, that we do have something that we could use instead of the commercial flights. And if it was available from elsewhere, particularly flying inter-Scotland to release it back up to north of Scotland, there's great opportunities for us to continue to explore that. There's also the things we run out of. Being an island, we account for things that we expect to come up and hold enough stock. But there are occasions where we are having an unusually high demand on certain therapeutics, and we already have to request same-day supplies from colleagues in Grampian, and this would give us a timing feature that we don't have with the current commercial timetable for flying.
And he points out that it's not just healthcare that would benefit from a drone network.
There's other businesses. We have we're a hugely strategic island group with the oil economy that is here in oil and gas and heavy industry, and they rely on just-in-time processes as well, and I'm sure that there would be opportunities for them to contribute towards it. So it feels like there is a marketable opportunity, because there'll always be a demand for people leaving the island, coming to the island, especially for tourism. It's very difficult to get a flight in Shetland in summer. It's even more difficult to get a cabin on the boat. There will be a need for both, so it's understanding that the market is there for an opportunity like this to exist, and then being able to realise the benefits as an NHS system because it exists.
Jamie explains that several test flights will have been conducted by the time CAELUS is wrapped up this summer. And although chemotherapy won't be transported during these flights, they will enable the consortium to collect data and analyse storage conditions on the drones. They'll do this by working with a company that's developed packaging that monitors pressure, vibration and temperature.
The intention at the end of CAELUS 2, at the end of this year, is that we will have undertaken live flight trials across areas in Ayrshire and Arran, near Edinburgh and Borders, and then up in the north between Aberdeen, Elgin and Inverness, and also between Orkney and Shetland. In each of these live flight trial areas, we're basically collaborating around some of the use cases that have come through the filtering system. So we're looking at how to transport blood samples, blood products, lots of different pharmaceutical items, including chemotherapy, and also small bits of equipment.
Anthony in Shetland is also keen to see the results of these test flights.
I think the benefits of doing this project the way that it's been organised is that there is going to be scrutiny and assessment and analysis of the storage conditions, particularly the hold that the significant cargo could go into. So that'll tell us vibration, temperature, G-force, and we know ourselves as pharmacists that some drugs precipitate more easily than others, and some drugs precipitate in agitation. It's perhaps not in our stability analysis when we're licensing medicines that we think about them flying on a plane, being on a drone, but certainly we've got enough data from our existing supply chains where they're on long haul, diesel powered movements through the country, over bumpy roads, that there's some confidence that it would be okay, but we definitely need to be spending some time getting the assurance that it is okay.
So all of this sounds great, but also like it might be a long way off. So when will NHS patients actually start benefiting from drone deliveries? Jamie explains that it's the integration of drones into the UK airspace that will be key to the success of medical drone delivery networks.
So, the Civil Aviation Authority is the regulator of UK airspace, and they have an innovation plan to develop one airspace for the UK, which incorporates and integrates all the unmanned aerial vehicle activity and the manned aerial activity. So this is really complex because you have the commercial aircraft, you have the military, you have the search and rescue helicopters, you have the police, you have the ambulance service, and then in amongst all of that you also have the general aviators, the hang gliders, the gliders, people with microlights, etc. So all of those airspace users have to be integrated in some way.
At the moment, if you want to fly a drone from A to B beyond the distance that you can see it, described as beyond visual line of sight, the only way to do this is by segregating that piece of airspace off in what's called a temporary danger area.
So you basically put a notice out through air traffic control to say that you're going to be using this bit of airspace for 3 hours or whatever on Tuesday morning, and everybody else keep away. But that doesn't really work if you want to have a network where a pharmacist in Elgin can go onto their app on their phone and ask for something to be delivered from Aberdeen to come straight up to Elgin within 2 hours. So the only way to do that really is to have that corridor of airspace integrated with all the users who are likely to be there, and they will be aware that drones will be flying up and down that corridor between a certain heights and certain distance across that sort of corridor. So it's almost like a three-dimensional piece of airspace that the drones will be flying up and down, and all the other aviators will be aware of that and have to take care if they're in that airspace. So it's a big jump to go from segregation to integration.
The Department for Transport published a joint government and industry strategy called the Future of Flight Action Plan in March 2024. This sets out an ambition for beyond visual line of sight operations for drones to be routine across the country by 2027. As part of the plan, earlier in 2024, the Civil Aviation Authority consulted on use of what's called an atypical air environment as a stepping stone to full integration. This recognises that there are certain volumes of airspace across the UK where drone operators are less likely to encounter conventional aircraft, for example close to infrastructure like buildings and power lines. The CAA says that this could help with medical drone deliveries in future if, for example, there's a route between two hospitals, say along railway lines or power lines, then they could make use of this atypical air environment policy. However, full integration through the adoption of detect and avoid technologies is the long-term goal. With that in mind, I asked Jamie how he sees medical drone deliveries developing within the NHS over the next decade.
I think you'll have two main sort of developments, but I'm guessing here, just from all the people that we've engaged with and talked to, the stakeholders across the north of Scotland. So I think what you might see quite quickly are hub and spoke setups in Orkney, Shetland, maybe the Western Isles, where you've got a small hospital on the main island and you can deliver antibiotics and analgesia and other small items out to the outer islands. That's relatively easier in terms of airspace regulation. It's cheaper, and it would certainly help those island groups in their logistics setups. So that's definitely one area that could develop quite quickly. And there are already drone operators in Orkney and that area delivering Royal Mail parcels, for instance. So, that's close to being a possible service, I think. The other area is around moving chemotherapy and larger volumes of therapeutic agents between aseptic laboratories and smaller units. And this is where you need the airspace to be integrated. So being able to fly chemotherapy up to Elgin from Aberdeen on a regular basis, 4 days a week, for instance, would dramatically change the provision of chemotherapy in the receiving hospital. So again, that would be where you would have a high impact for a smaller network development. It'll be many years, I think, before the whole of a country like Scotland develops a network that's comprehensive across the whole country. That would be a much more difficult thing to create.
I asked Paul the same question.
Drones would show their ability to deliver things probably more directly from manufacturers. Drones would be very good at being more responsive. I would imagine things like, if we have another pandemic, using drones to deliver vaccines and that kind of thing would be absolutely fantastic because it breaks the chains of infection. I don't think drones will ever be delivering, cases of Calpol. Heavy, dense bottles of things that have got a 3-year expiry. That's not what they're going to do. So it's not going to affect the sort of bread and butter stuff. I think when we get more sort of patient-specific doses, so I could perceive, I've got no real evidence for this, but quite a lot of, say, 3D printing technology where patient-specific doses are given. They may be printed in pharmacies, but printing still takes a bit of time. So could a patient come in, get their particular dose. A bit like, say, a chemotherapy now, because that dose is based on your surface area, your height and your size and your weight. So for other medicines, could that be, say warfarin, titrating in the right dose is quite tricky to do. Could that then be made in the pharmacies with technology like 3D printing, but it'll take a bit of time, then that's flown directly to the patient afterwards? I can see that happening very well. So I think it's small amounts, things that are very high impact, things that need to be personally specific to a person. I think absolutely the drone would be fantastic for that and be adopted. But, big crates of stuff, I think the van will still be used.
Christopher from Apian believes that drones will help transform the NHS to make it fit to face the challenges of the future.
In order to have a huge transformation in healthcare, we do need to have a huge transformation in the way we look at things and provide solutions to the problems that are facing us with the waiting times, the staff efficiencies. That there's a massive staff shortage currently, as across the healthcare service. So the only way to solve it is to either increase our throughput or is to have a massive transformation that would actually allow us to reset this whole service. So I think drones is that answer.
I'm really interested to see how all of these projects progress over the next few years. Aviation and healthcare are two of the most regulated industries, and rightly so, but it does mean that collecting the data needed to get all of the necessary regulations in place is an enormous task. And of course, we'll be keeping you up to date with all of the latest developments along the way. That's it from me for this episode. Thanks to all of our contributors, and more importantly, thanks to you for listening. We really appreciate your support for our journalism. The best way to make sure you never miss an episode is to hit follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. The PJ Pod is brought to you by the Pharmaceutical Journal, the official journal of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society. And just before I let you go, if you're interested in joining the Royal Pharmaceutical Society to access a range of member benefits, including the Pharmaceutical Journal's news, features and learning resources, you can do so for the equivalent of just 60 pence a day. Just search RPS membership to find out more. This episode was part of the July issue of the Pharmaceutical Journal. It was produced by Jeff Marsh and presented by me, Dawn Connelly, with support from Carolyn Wickware. See you next month.